Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on the state of climate change adaptation in the Great Lakes region, sponsored by EcoAdapt. We are a nonprofit based out of the Seattle area focused on climate change adaptation. My name is Rachel Gregg, and I'm a lead scientist with the organization. And I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Jesse Kirshner and Jessica Hitt. We're very pleased to give you a sneak peek of the results of our survey of climate adaptation activities in the region. To give you an idea of what we're going to be covering today, I will be discussing the project background and provide some overall results from our interviews and surveys before turning it over to two other presenters who are going to be sharing their own adaptation experiences. We're very happy to welcome Leslie Brandt from the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, who will be talking about the Climate Change Response Framework, and Elizabeth Riggs from the Huron River Watershed Council, who will be providing details on two of their projects, creating climate resilient communities and enhancing local water conservation. Climate change is affecting all systems and will continue to do so for centuries to come. We need to re-examine management and planning through the climate lens and incorporate climate change into medium and long-term planning in order to minimize the risk and maximize the success of our conservation and management measures. Responses to climate change are classified as either mitigation or adaptation. Mitigation strategies help us reduce the rate and extent of change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions or enhancing carbon uptake and storage. But this actually relies quite a bit on multilateral agreement and consensus, which, as the cartoon there reflects, has been pretty difficult to achieve to date. Adaptation strategies help people prepare for the unavoidable effects of climate change, either by minimizing negative impacts or exploiting potential opportunities. So in this sense, we view adaptation as an insurance policy to protect ourselves and our investments from the effects of climate change. The field of adaptation itself is in a period of transition where practitioners must now move from theory to practice, including implementation and monitoring of efforts. The purpose of EcoAdapt's State of Adaptation program is to help facilitate this transition by providing real-life practical case study examples to try and catalyze some creative thinking around climate change, and by synthesizing information collected through interviews and surveys. We received funding to survey North American marine and coastal environments and terrestrial and coastal western U.S. states and Canadian provinces and territories. What we do is we conduct interviews and surveys, try and identify some common barriers and trends, develop case studies, and then use all of the information collected for different products, including the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange database, our blog Adaptation Nation, and some synthesis reports and products like our 2011 report on the state of marine and coastal adaptation in North America. We also received funding from the Mott Foundation to expand our survey to the freshwater resources of the Great Lakes region. In this project, we conducted interviews and surveys with practitioners to try and identify and assess, where possible, some adaptation activities. We created case studies of selected projects and developed a state of adaptation report. And we're sharing our findings through outreach events such as this, and also through the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange database, or CAKE, and some other resources to try and help increase awareness and hopefully motivate action on climate change. And I want to acknowledge our project team here, which is myself, Jesse Kirshner, Jessica Hitt, and Kirsten Feisel. The Great Lakes region, as we've defined it, is composed of 2 Canadian provinces, 8 U.S. states, and the watersheds, lakes, and rivers that surround the 5 primary lakes. This includes the St. Lawrence River and several other rivers, and some of the smaller lakes such as St. Clair and Lake Champlain. The region contains 21% of the world's freshwater supply and 84% of North America's surface freshwater supply. The economy is dominated by water-dependent uses, including agriculture, shipping, fisheries, and tourism and recreation. And the region is already vulnerable because of non-climatic stressors such as increased urban and suburban development, pollution, habitat degradation, and invasive species establishment. In addition, alterations to the landscape such as dams, levees, water diversions or withdrawals for agriculture and development, and removal or destruction of vegetation in coastal and riparian zones, all of these things combine to decrease the resilience of freshwater systems. And of course, the impacts of climate change are going to act as another layer of stress to the natural and built systems in the Great Lakes. Freshwater systems in the region are already experiencing climate-induced effects that are causing second-order changes on ecosystems and human communities. These changes are manifesting in air and water temperatures, precipitation patterns, lake levels, and water chemistry. And these climatic changes are causing and are going to continue to cause more intense weather events, flooding, altered species ranges, habitat loss, algae blooms, altered primary productivity, shoreline erosion, changes to the water supply, and more. Of course, a lot of the projections of climate change and associated effects are difficult to make because how much and how soon change happens really depends on what we do about mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, how vulnerable our systems are, and what the level of preparedness in our systems is. Adaptation activities may be grouped in a number of ways. In order to organize our findings, we grouped relevant strategies by the following categories. We examined examples from the natural and built environments as they relate to freshwater resources in both capacity building and policy. We examined examples from natural systems and natural resource management and conservation, and then those focused on the built environment and infrastructure planning and development. What I'm going to do now is walk you through each of these categories and give some examples of the projects and initiatives we've come across. The first category is capacity building. So I mentioned earlier, climate change adaptation is a developing field, and that's going to require a significant amount of capacity in order to move from theory to practice. And people are rarely formally trained on how to integrate climate change into their work, which creates both great need and great opportunity. And it turns out that the majority of projects uncovered in our survey are actually focused on building capacity to address climate change. One strategy is designing or reforming institutions. A lot of institutions have been created in the Great Lakes to support adaptation, such as the Michigan Climate Coalition, which is a public-private partnership modeled after the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, and the Ontario Center for Climate Impacts and Adaptation Resources. This strategy also includes doing things like increasing organizational capacity and coordinating planning and management. Another strategy is conducting research, studies, and assessments on impacts and vulnerability in order to collect information and really try and understand how climate change is going to affect different sectors. So for example, there are a few species level impact assessments occurring at a few different scales in the region. In Minnesota, the National Park Service and partners are collaborating on a project to try and track moose movement within Voyageurs National Park. What they're doing is they're using GPS collars that provide location and temperature data at different time intervals. And they're using the data collected to allow them to test some hypotheses about moose movement in relation to changes in temperature and weather, and also to try and identify areas that may act as potential climate refugia in the future. Training and planning workshops are also popular in the region. A series of workshops have been run by Freshwater Future and us at EcoAdapt since 2010 in different Great Lakes cities. Each workshop tries to orient participants to climate change science basics and some predicted regional impacts before focusing on allowing the participants to brainstorm and develop adaptation solutions to develop in their own work. Another strategy is increasing public awareness, education, and outreach. This includes improving the links between climate science, management, conservation, and public awareness. And one example of that is of Climate Wisconsin, which is a website dedicated to telling some local stories of climate change impacts around the state. These stories are supported and informed by research conducted by the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts. Resources and tools can make adaptation decision-making and action easier, and many of these have been developed for the Great Lakes. One example is from the National Wildlife Federation and EcoAdapt, who received funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to try and develop some climate-smart restoration guidance materials for the region. And that includes the technical guidance document pictured here, Restoring the Great Lakes Coastal Future. What this document is really a climate-smart framework for restoration. It provides users with a suite of tools and some case studies and a methodology to approach restoration given the reality of climate change. Finally, monitoring can help practitioners track environmental changes and identify needed modifications and apply management strategies. And a lot of effort has been invested in the region in monitoring for environmental change, but to date there's really an overall lack of evaluation of effectiveness of adaptation action. The second category is policy. Climate change is obviously not going to be confined by any political boundaries, and it's definitely going to require coordinated policy and planning efforts. And strategies in this category include the three listed here: developing adaptation plans, creating new or enhancing existing policies and regulations, and developing adaptive management strategies. And climate change adaptation plans are being developed and implemented at all levels of government and even in some nonprofit organizations in the Great Lakes region. And some examples of provincial or state level adaptation plans that have been developed are those in Ontario, Quebec, New York, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Another example is enhancing existing regulations. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, which really guides transboundary efforts to protect regional water quality, recently added an annex that's completely dedicated to climate change. The third category is natural resource management and conservation. So restoration is a key activity in many areas, and a lot of those restoration activities are going to generally enhance the resilience of ecosystems. And there are a few climate-smart restoration activities already occurring in the Great Lakes region. For example, the National Wildlife Federation and EcoAdapt project that I mentioned earlier actually includes several pilot projects that are implementing the climate-smart framework that the partners developed. They're implementing that framework on the ground. Another strategy is enhancing connectivity in areas under protection. So this includes protecting adequate and appropriate space to allow for climate-induced shifts in species ranges and movements. For example, in the city of Chicago, the Natural Environment Adaptation Working Group is working to expand their green infrastructure vision map, which is pictured there. It's a little bit small, I know, in order to identify and prioritize key areas of connectivity. They're also trying to protect buffers in some open space. They're improving existing habitat on some publicly owned properties like parks and preserves that already act or may act as critical corridors into the future. And they're also restoring habitats to maximize connectivity. Reducing local change can also help minimize vulnerability in natural systems, and this includes maintaining riparian and coastal vegetation cover or reducing deforestation, which in turn can provide some shoreline stabilization, increase water retention, and slow water flows and velocity. And this particular strategy is being applied in a number of areas throughout the region. There are also numerous non-climate stressors that already affect the Great Lakes, like we mentioned earlier, which makes the region more vulnerable to climate change. Examples of activities to reduce non-climate stressors likely to interact with climate change include managing water withdrawals, reducing pollution, and reducing the presence and extent of invasive and non-native species. The final category of adaptation strategies is infrastructure planning and development. This category deals with climate-related threats to water resources and communities and the means to protect infrastructure and public health and safety. The first strategy is making infrastructure resistant or resilient to climate change. So for example, existing stormwater management systems will likely not be able to handle future runoff and water flows, which can lead to infrastructure and property damage, water quality degradation, and habitat loss. In the Weather Extreme Trends project in Minnesota's Minnehaha Creek watershed, project leads are evaluating existing stormwater systems, identifying vulnerabilities, and leading a community-driven process to develop adaptation plans for stormwater systems in the watershed. Local community planning and engagement are key to adaptation implementation. The New York Climate Smart Communities program provides communities with technical support and guidance, and as part of the program, each community must adopt a model pledge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prepare for climate change. So it has that nice combination of mitigation and adaptation strategies that we like to see. And in that project, the Department of Environmental Conservation provides step-by-step guidance to assist communities on how to conduct emissions inventories, develop climate action plans, and also reduce energy needs. And so far, communities in 6 counties in the Great Lakes region have joined the program. In addition, practitioners can create or modify shoreline management measures by using green infrastructure and low-impact development practices. And these techniques really mimic and support the use of natural features, including permeable surfaces, water retention ponds, green roofs, urban forestry, rain barrels, and rain gardens. And all of those techniques can help to moderate increases in temperature and also changes in precipitation patterns. And finally, climate change may exacerbate natural disasters in the region, including droughts, floods, severe storms, and extreme heat. And disaster preparedness and mitigation plans can help communities identify risks and develop response and recovery options. And there are a few examples from the region that incorporate climate change. One is from the Bay Lake Regional Planning Commission, which has incorporated climate change into its guide for hazard mitigation planning for Wisconsin coastal communities. The guide actually encourages practitioners to develop multi-hazard mitigation plans that integrate the projected increases in intensity and frequency of events such as temperature extremes, storms, floods, and droughts. So those are some brief examples from our survey. And we now have two speakers who are going to get more in depth on their efforts to address climate change. First up is Leslie Brandt, who's a climate change specialist with the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. And I'll turn it over to you, Leslie.
Thanks. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So first I'd like to acknowledge that this is a joint effort between the Forest Service, the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, and a number of other partners across state, federal, non-governmental, and private organizations across the Midwest and Eastern U.S. Also like to specifically acknowledge my colleagues at the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, our director, Chris Swanson, and then Maria Genoviak, Patricia Butler, and Stephen Handler, who, like myself, coordinate climate change response framework projects throughout the eastern United States. So next slide, please. So when you think about water quality, I think it's important to think about where that water is coming from, and forests are a big part of that equation. And protecting and managing forests in source watersheds are essential parts of future strategies for providing clean, safe drinking water and clean lakes and rivers now and into the future. And these figures here, the areas in blue on the left indicate watersheds that have a high ability to provide clean water, and these line up well with areas that are primarily forested, which are shown in brown and green areas on the right. You can, next slide. Okay. So we designed the climate change response framework to help manage our forests sustainably into the future under an uncertain climate. And the framework is a six-step process that can be applied at multiple scales. The first step is to identify a location, ecosystems of interest, and a time frame, and then to work to establish partnerships within that area. And then those partners work together to assess ecosystem vulnerabilities to climate change, compile adaptation strategies and approaches, and then plan and implement adaptation actions at appropriate scales, and then ultimately integrate that into monitoring and evaluation. Next slide. Currently, there are 3 large eco-regional framework projects underway. These are in various stages of development. The Wisconsin portion of the North Woods project began in 2009 and was the pilot project that served as a model for expansion into other areas. Next slide. The climate change response framework has 4 major deliverables. Partnerships are, like I mentioned, between scientists, land managers, federal, state, non-governmental, university, and industry organizations. And these partners work together to develop vulnerability assessments. And these focus on understanding how climate change may affect forests in a specific area. And then we use that vulnerability information to incorporate into our next step, which is summarized in a document called the Forest Adaptation Resources. And this document identifies strategies and approaches to responding to climate change, and then works with land managers to develop specific on-the-ground tactics. And that brings me to the last part, which is demonstration projects. And these incorporate information from the forest adaptation resources and vulnerability assessments into decision-making and on-the-ground projects. Next slide. To give you an example of how the framework operates, I'm going to walk you through a few highlights from our Wisconsin framework project that is the furthest along. Next slide. To increase collaboration and dialogue, partners from the Wisconsin Framework Project launched a new effort called the Shared Landscapes Initiative. The Shared Landscapes Initiative is a cross-ownership partnership that provides a forum for the forestry community in northern Wisconsin to discuss climate change impacts on ecosystems, management responses, and cooperative activities across a variety of organizations. Next slide. These partners have worked together to develop a vulnerability assessment for northern Wisconsin. A first version of the assessment has been completed and is available free for download, and the link is shown here on the right. This assessment is geared towards land managers and focuses on forest ecosystems in northern Wisconsin and assesses the vulnerability of particular tree species as well as forest types in northern Wisconsin. Next slide. A second version of the assessment is currently in development, and as with the first, the assessment contains several key components. A literature review, 2 different forest impact modeling approaches, downscaled climate projections, gridded historical climate trends, and then all of that information is integrated together and evaluated by experts in a panel process for determining vulnerability of key forest ecosystem types. Next slide. The information from the vulnerability assessment is incorporated into adaptation actions using the Forest Adaptation Resources document. This has 3 main components, a menu of adaptation strategies and approaches, an adaptation workbook that walks managers through a decision-making process, and finally, illustrations or case studies showing how this process is being used in real-world examples. Next slide. The workbook includes 5 key steps, and the second of which incorporates information from the vulnerability assessment. And this is sort of an adaptive management process that can be modified and used over the course of many projects. Next slide. The workbook approach is currently being tried out on land management projects in northern Wisconsin. And we call these demonstration projects because they demonstrate real-world examples of climate adaptation. These demonstrations are currently focused on the Bad River watershed, which is a watershed that I had described earlier that provides clean water and also drains into Lake Superior. And we currently have the Carolyn Lakes project, which is run by the Nature Conservancy, is one of our collaborators in this project. So each organization reviews its individual land management practices and objectives and walks through the workbook to identify relevant adaptation strategies and specific stand-level tactics. So for example, in the Carolyn Lakes, their objective was to maintain species composition and diversity and increase structural diversity. And they looked at their current practice, and then they identified 5 possible adaptation actions. And then 2 of these were selected as something that they thought that they could incorporate into their current land management plan. Next slide. So if you'd like to learn more about the climate framework process or what else we have underway, please visit our website, which is climateframework.org, or feel free to contact me. And it looks like my name is cut off at the bottom, but I'm sure you can get that contact information from our workshop or webinar organizers. Thanks.
Yes, we'll definitely send that out. Sorry about that. Thanks, Leslie. And next up, we have Elizabeth Riggs from the Huron River Watershed Council.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Also, I just wanted to say that on this call with us is our new watershed planner, Rebecca Esselman, who joined us this summer to head up our climate work. So she'll also be available during the question and answer portion of the webinar to talk about the project. The Huron River Watershed Council has been around since 1965, making our council the first one in Michigan. So we have a long history of working for the Huron River, and we currently have a staff of 10 professionals ranging from watershed planners and ecologists to development director, marketing director, and so on. We have been working, as I said, since 1965 on this 900 square miles of southeastern Michigan. The watershed is located, just to get you oriented, and there's a map there for you to see, but we're in between Detroit and Lansing. The type of watershed is it has just about everything in it. We have some agricultural area. There's the Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti metropolitan area. There's quite a bit of low density and medium density residential. But we're fortunate to have quite a bit of protected land in the form of state recreation areas and regional metro parks, as well as some county and local park systems. We have about 70 units of government that are encompassed within the watershed. So when we are working on a project at the watershed scale, there are many partners to involve. We have a number of threatened and endangered species in the watershed. The river is known for a very nice smallmouth bass fishery. It's also popular with fly fishing. So that gives you a sense of the type of river that we have. It's warm water. There's some cool water. It's a fairly low gradient system. And there's also quite a bit of recreation that happens both in the parks that I mentioned and then also on the river itself with the Huron River Water Trail. The next slide, please. Thanks. With our fairly robust mix of programs, we've been doing a lot of different things, and you can see more about that on our website, which will be up on a future slide. But we have a number of programs in place, including monitoring of ambient stream water quality, macroinvertebrates, stream flow. And so from that work and from just living here and seeing that weather weirdness that's been happening, our staff started talking about how do we incorporate this issue and this message of climate change into the work that we're doing. And our first foray into this was taking one of our quarterly newsletters and making it focused on climate change, taking a look at the best research and climate information that was available at the time. This was put out in 2009. And thinking about what the researchers were saying, the climate scientists and researchers, and then considering how those projected changes would impact this watershed and how it interacts with our programming. We also noted, and so some of those changes are listed there on the slide for you. Our typical concerns in this watershed are from hydrologic alteration, excessive nutrients, the general non-point source pollution mixture. And we've had a history of facilitating and implementing different Clean Water Act tools like the total maximum daily loads. And climate change has been, or this weather weirdness has been exacerbating those existing problems and stressors on the river, and it's also been highlighting those gaps or weak links in river and water management in this watershed. So we shared our observations as a staff and our recommendations in that newsletter, but we knew that that was just going to be the beginning, and we talked about internally what we do to get this message across more to all those different watershed partners of ours. We recognize that many of the existing programs we were doing already were adding resiliency in the watershed. Things like, well, the programs that I already mentioned, the fact that we are monitoring the river pretty extensively with a lot of volunteers. We also have a project that has been working for a number of years on mapping and rapidly assessing the remaining natural areas and then working to protect them. We've also been promoting policies and projects and continue to that protect and restore riparian corridors, wetlands, and other critical parts of the watershed. So after having done the newsletter, we were talking with our stakeholders and also peer groups, other river and watershed groups in the Great Lakes and around the country to look at what kind of approach we might take to address climate change at a watershed level. And we were surprised to find that we were actually one of the few groups who were talking about that and trying to figure out how to integrate. We also, I should mention, as part of our conversations, are involved with the Michigan Climate Coalition that Rachel mentioned earlier, and a few of us on staff, including myself, have worked with River Network on their Water Energy Nexus group. So we've been able to tap into those networks both at the state level and nationally to learn from others and also to share our experiences. So from the conversations internally and with our partners, we talked about what were going to be our next steps. And actually, it was pretty easy to figure that out because we'd had a number of conversations with the water resource managers in our watershed about their everyday experiences and frustrations with how the tools that they were using and that they had available to them to make decisions in their daily jobs just were no longer adequate. So for example, one of our, in Michigan, we have drain commissioners or water resource commissioners, which was appropriate for a state that was primarily one large wetland and had subsequently been drained for agriculture. So we still have these county positions, and these, we'll call them county water managers, have been receiving complaint calls from residents about flooding that was happening, and we just have been inundated with these high intensity but brief rain events, followed by quite a bit of drought periods. So they were getting complaints about it and naturally engaging with us in conversations about what to do about it. Next slide, please. The project that we have developed, it's making climate resilient communities at a watershed level, has been our initial response for incorporating expected changes with the changes in climate. So the purpose of this project, as it says, is to enhance the ability of our local communities to respond to and adapt to climate change. We just are wrapping up the first year of this project. Really, another way that I like to think about this project is that it's kind of the support group for our local partners who are trying to figure out how to have different tools and procedures to do their jobs more effectively. The project information that's listed here is for that first year. We had an $80,000 budget. Just under half of that was from the Mott Foundation, and the remainder of the budget was made up by multiple foundations, some of the smaller family foundations, and also some of our units of government like the City of Ann Arbor. We are fortunate in that we have a couple of terrific partners on the project. First one is GLESA, which is the Great Lakes Integrated Sciences and Assessments group. So this is the RESA for the Great Lakes area, some of you may be familiar with. They are based at the University of Michigan and Michigan State University, and they've been essential to our work. They enable us to have access to climate scientists and researchers and help us vet these ideas, these wild imaginings that we have of what we can figure out at the local level, and then they can kind of keep us in check with what information is available now and what information just isn't available, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. So GLESA has been a great resource. They've provided staff to us and that expertise. And also River Network has been involved, and they are helpful in providing us with resources on the project and with helping us scale up to reach those other river and watershed groups that are part of River Network. The process that we determined for this, and it was developed in part with our local stakeholders, was to identify those sectors in our watershed whose work was most closely tied to changes in precipitation and climate. And those are listed here. There was, just to give you a little description of each of these, the Water Infrastructure Group is composed of people who are working on wastewater, drinking water, and stormwater. In-Stream Flows Group is made up of people whose work deals specifically in the river. So these might be hydrologists, biologists, and we also have dam operators. And then Natural Infrastructure Group is composed of people who are working on natural resource management and protection, or natural lands, so our land trusts, land conservancies, for example. The structure of the project has been to engage everybody initially in a kickoff plenary that happened last December, where we brought together the climate scientists from GLESA, River Network, and also our watershed partners. We invited we had an invite list of about 75 people who we specifically wanted to invite to be a part of this process. And really at that meeting, it was partially a meeting to determine who would be engaged enough over the next several months to stick with this process. Because after that kickoff plenary, we were envisioning facilitating these 3 sector groups so that they moved forward in parallel with monthly meetings. So at each monthly meeting, our organization would facilitate those and move them from, at the beginning, identifying what their challenges were in their sector, and then moving forward with reviewing what was the current climate science that was particular to their sector, and eventually moving them along to identifying what would be the high impact strategies that they would want to pursue at the end of the project. We're coming on the point now of taking those strategies, wrapping them up, and presenting them at a closing plenary that'll be happening in about a month. In terms of examples of strategies that these groups have pursued, I'll introduce these, and Rebecca may want to expand on them during the question and answer. The Water Infrastructure Group has pursued a couple of things, one of which is to identify some no regrets strategies that they could pursue. Some of you may be familiar with that. The other angle that they've been after is trying to influence the process of that NOAA uses to update the rainfall frequency curves. So they have rainfall atlases for each part of the country. The update for our region of the Great Lakes is currently happening, and the group has been trying to influence that process by sharing with NOAA the latest climatology for this part of Michigan, so that the rainfall information that's included in the atlas is more representative of more current weather patterns. The In-Stream group, In-Stream Flows, this has been particularly interesting to me in that what this group noted, probably above all other needs, is that they don't currently, the dam operators on our river don't have a communication network or standard operating procedure among them. And so we've been working with them to create a dam operators communications network so that they are able to share information about flows in the river on a more real-time basis. The Natural Infrastructure Group has been working on creating species profiles, indicator species profiles that would serve as proxies for changes in habitat. To give you a sense of how this would be useful, one of our participants from one of the local land conservancies said, what should we be thinking about when a landowner wants to donate a property to our land conservancy? Should we still be protecting land for a particular species or habitat type if 50 to 100 years from now that species or habitat type is not really going to be part of the mosaic of this part of Michigan. So it's really helping them decide what is the best way to use limited resources. Next slide, please. The other project that we've been working on is one that gets more at water conservation. Our climate resilient work tends to focus more on climate adaptation, and this is getting a little bit at the mitigation side of things with the water conservation focus. But through the Saving Water Saves Energy project, the Watershed Council has been looking at that nexus of water and energy and climate change and trying to communicate more convincingly and clearly what that relationship is. That idea that if you save water, you're actually saving energy because there's less energy required to produce that water for domestic purposes, and then the converse is true as well. So this project is a 3-year project that began in 2011. The funder for this project is actually a foundation from the Masco Corporation. Masco is a company that works in home improvement. They have a number of different businesses under their umbrella, including Delta Faucets. They ultimately would like to see themselves as the EPA WaterSense Partner of the Year. Some of their competitors, like Kohler, already have that distinction, and so they're increasingly moving toward this direction of encouraging water conservation. Other project partners on this project, River Network again, and then the Alliance for Water Efficiency based in Chicago, and they have been a new partner for us, a valuable one in helping our project staff be connected to people who are working in this sector of water use. That's something that's newer for us. The purpose, as you can see here, is focused on educating residents, businesses, and our peer groups on water conservation and efficiency in order to reduce the impacts or the effects of climate change. One of the main challenges for us on this project is to identify what is the most meaningful way to reach residents, businesses in the water-rich state of Michigan and the Great Lakes, because water conservation typically for us has not been an easy sell when water is so easily available. So in this 3-year project, our process has been primarily in years 1 and 2 to do marketing research and involve focus groups to enable us to tailor our messaging and to start developing resources and tools that we can scale up to national markets in year 3. So there's been significant effort on reaching homeowners through a number of different means. So in the interest of time, we, on the Climate Resilient Communities Project, our next step we've been working on securing funding for year 2 in order to continue moving forward with the sector groups and their strategies, implementing those. And then we still have a year of working on the Saving Water Saves Energy, and as I mentioned, we're going to be focusing on how do we scale up to the other markets across the country for encouraging that water conservation through the Saving Water Saves Energy messaging. So thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So there are quite a few adaptation initiatives underway in the Great Lakes region, but obviously there have been some challenges. Some of the barriers to taking action listed by our survey participants include those listed on this slide. So things like a lack of financial capacity, which I'm sure we can all relate to, which includes limited funding to support staff time to either initiate or sustain your climate change effort. There's also a lack of institutional capacity, which is limited staff knowledge and or resources to support internal and coordinated efforts, a lack of political will and mandate for action, limited guidance on how to apply the wide variety of information that is now available on climate change impacts and adaptation, and then also limited information sharing between and across agencies and organizations. However, the good thing is that there are plenty of opportunities. So these include enhancing collaborative efforts in the region through the sharing of resources, tools, and knowledge, increasing knowledge and information translation to try and help practitioners overcome some paralysis around analyzing that data and integrating adaptation and applying it in their decision-making process. Also, engaging in other national or international efforts. The region could definitely benefit from joining other efforts such as the Water Utility Climate Alliance and the Storm Smart Coast Network. Enhancing monitoring and evaluation to track what is and is not working so that approaches can be modified. One example of a resource that is now available is this Climate Eval site, whose link is noted here on the slide. And then finally, increasing knowledge sharing and exchange. So a lot of effort has been made to enhance information development and dissemination, but increasing the number of mechanisms through which this knowledge is shared could be enhanced. So GLESA Climate and the Adaptation Collaboratory are two such regional means that we would really encourage you to visit. In addition, engaging in and sharing local knowledge on more national and international websites such as CAKE and We Adapt. We also promote adaptation activities in the Great Lakes. Users could apply lessons learned from case studies from other regions to local efforts in the Great Lakes, and hopefully other users could use lessons learned from you folks doing work in the Great Lakes and apply it to their efforts. And on that note, I want to turn it over to Jessica Hitt, who is our CAKE program manager, to talk about a little bit more about CAKE and why we've done what we've done.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Hitt, and I'm the CAKE program manager. And CAKE was created in partnership by Adapt and Island Press, and has been primarily supported by the Kresge Foundation, as well as the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And Adapt will become the sole project manager of CAKE in January 2013. CAKE was launched in July 2010 and was designed to really provide an approachable and accessible resource full of content and tools and resources, as well as advice to support action on the ground. And really help managers find and access the wealth of information that already exists so they can take action now instead of waiting into the future and spend less time reinventing the wheel and more time growing and moving the field forward. So on the next slide, you'll see our wonderful CAKE logo and our URL, cakex.org. And we're going to take a quick field trip to the website to introduce you a little bit more to the CAKE resource. So today we really wanted to show you how to browse and find resources on the site that you'll need, encourage everyone to sign up, and encourage everyone to start thinking about different ways you can actually partner with CAKE and get in touch with us about those. So just to orient you a bit to the home page, you'll see at the top are 5 pieces of CAKE. The case studies, which we'll speak to in a second, and the library, which houses adaptation relevant resources, the directory, which houses people and their profiles as well as organizations, tools to help you process climate information and make adaptation decisions, and the community section, which is a great place to find out what's happening in the field, what opportunities there are. We also house an advice column and a discussion forum for you to connect with the field. Above, you have the links to the register, hint, hint, register for CAKE, as well as the sign-in button if you are already a registered user, which hopefully many of you are. So moving down, you can see the rotating content here. This is to kind of direct you to something new or interesting on CAKE. To the right, you have the georeference map, and we'll be exploring that in a bit. And below that, you have this ability to search and browse, which we'll also explore in a bit. And then our Don't Panic button, which is a little hitchhiker guide to the Galaxy reference, and a little primer on adaptation. And then moving down the page, you'll see other opportunities to join, sign up, just how you can interact with CAKE and get involved, essentially. And then further down the page, you'll see our sponsors and project partners. So let's go to the case study page to explore a little bit about our case studies, which you've been hearing about today. Historically, the case study section has been primarily filled through our efforts from the Adapt State of Adaptation program, which you've been hearing about today. We also have a number of user-submitted case studies. On the green bar on the right-hand side, you can find the opportunity to connect to our RSS feed, so you can see when new case studies are added, Again, a search opportunity, and then down a little bit, you'll find an opportunity to submit your own case study once you've actually registered and become a case user. So on the main page, you see our featured case study as well as our What's New. The What's New is actually a Great Lakes user-submitted case study, and so let's check that out and orient you to a little bit the case study layout. So all of our case studies are uniform in layout. You can see the title. You can see the case study authors, and then also the project lead below, and if they're same or different, and then also the lead organization there. Moving down, you'll find the project summary or overview, and then the project background, and then moving way down, because this is a pretty long case study, you'll see the project background keywords, which you can click on to expand. And if you clicked on a keyword of interest, it would take you to a browse page of other items on Cake that have also clicked that keyword. So you could find relevant and related resources such as freshwater, which we'll explore this a little bit in the future. So scrolling down, you can continue to see the project implementation, and as well as this is a long case study, but then you can also see the project implementation keywords, or you can expand those as well. And then below the implementation keywords, you have the project outcomes and conclusions. And then last but not least, the recommended citation for the case studies. So going back up, just to draw your attention to the green bar, which we have on the side of every page. This is where we really use to point users to other relevant and related content on the site. So here you'll see external resources, which will bring you to further project information. If there was any other related tools or documents on Cake, it would take you to their profiles and let you find out a little bit about them. Next, let's check out the Browse feature, which is a new feature on Cake, or an enhanced feature on Cake. As Cake has been growing over the last couple of years, we really realized there was so much content, we really wanted to expand the ability of users to actually browse what was on Cake to find and locate what they needed quickly. So on the left-hand side, you'll see ways to actually refine your search down for our pieces of Cake and their little icons there. You can search for a case study specifically or for a tool specifically, and then actually drill down to say maybe your sector or your habitat or whatever it may be that is your area of interest. So we entered Cake from the Browse Case Studies homepage, so you'll see right there that there's we've actually, the case study section is highlighted, so that allows you, we're only seeing case studies in this section. So say running through a search scenario, we're looking for projects focusing on freshwater, and then you can see it'll now bring up, now you'll have case studies that are focusing on freshwater, and you can drill down further depending on your area of interest, whether it's an adaptation strategy you're looking to find more about, or maybe you're looking for a certain type of jurisdiction or scale, so community or local, or even a impact of interest. So this will allow you to really kind of find what's relevant for Cake on you. So going back up to the top, say you've drilled down and you're like, this is great, these resources are wonderful, you know who really uses these? A colleague of mine. You could actually use the share this button to share this exact search page, and you can just email it right over to your colleague, and when they open that link, it'll bring them right to this search page with the specifications already clicked. So they'll see exactly what you're seeing now. So that's a quick tour of the Cake site and a little bit what you can find on and how you can use it. And just one more plug for everyone to register and actually become an active part of the Cake community. So moving back over to the PowerPoint, you've heard a little bit from Rachel on the State of Adaptation program, and I've just walked you briefly through the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange, or CAKE, and I just wanted to talk briefly to our other two programs and some projects of interest. Our Awareness Action Program, which are capacity building workshops aimed at moving people from awareness to action and implementation. One project under our Awareness to Action Program, which would be of interest, is the National Adaptation Forum, which EcoAdapt is working on with a host of partners. and was an effort that actually grew out of our Marine and Coastal State of Adaptation Survey funded by the Moore Foundation. And this will be actually a whole conference and training forum dedicated to adaptation, and the themes focus on the adaptation process. So the themes being problem identification, planning, and capacity building, implementation, and evaluation. And we encourage everyone here with us today to attend the conference. It's in Denver, Colorado in April next year, but also to consider submitting a proposal for a poster, a presentation, working group, whatever your area of interest is. If you go to the nationaladaptationforum.org, you can find the call for proposals, and you can also sign up for their mail list and actually stay up to date on that project. Next, we have our adaptation consultation program, which is our project work. We like to relate it to, we do the fishing for you, and it's a program in our project work that's really tailored to our partners' needs, and the work can run the gamut from vulnerability assessments to mapping and spatial tools. And one of our future project here is Adaptation Marketplace, which we're hoping to actually expand into other regions. This project focuses on the Coral Triangle. I hand it back over to Rachel to wrap it up.
Sure. So thank you so much for joining us today. We are actually going to be releasing the report and the recording of this webinar early next week, and the case studies and some other resources are going to be available on CAKE shortly. We're going to send everyone who joined us on the webinar today an email announcement announcing that release, as well as the press release. We do want to open up the floor for questions now, but one thing I want to point out is that we have created a project page on our website. So if you go to the project page, if you go to ecoadapt.org and click on State of Adaptation, you'll see a link to the Great Lakes project page. So you can click on that and get a little bit more information if you'd like. Some related case studies that are on CAKE already, and that's where we'll be posting the report and the recording of the webinar. We'll also send out an email of this presentation for all of those. Sorry about the cutoff of Leslie's name, and we'll send out everybody's names and emails so you can get in touch with the presenters as you see fit. So we want to open up the floor for questions, and please feel free to direct your questions to any of the presenters. I think we just need you to press *6 to unmute yourself, or you can use the chat feature to ask questions. Any takers?
Rachel, when can people expect these case studies to start showing up on CAKE?
Hopefully by next week. We are planning to start uploading them very shortly, but that is when they'll be there. You can subscribe to that RSS feed that Jessica pointed out and get the immediate update, or you can wait and have us announce it to you when we release all the other materials related to this project. Okay, well, it is 12 o'clock, so I understand that we only reserved an hour for this webinar. So if you do have any questions in the future, please let us know. This will be available online. We are more than happy to answer any questions. My email is just my name, rachel@ecoadapt.org, and we really look forward to sharing this project with you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we want to thank Leslie and Elizabeth, obviously, for joining us and presenting on their projects as well. That was really great to hear the perspective from a first-hand basis.